Good morning, and welcome to the Texas Library Association's first ever virtual conference. My name is Leah Mann, and as the co-chair of this year's conference, it is my privilege to introduce this morning's special guest. Before we begin, I want to thank Little Brown Books for Young Readers for making today's keynote speaker's appearance possible. Jason Reynolds is a #1 New York Times bestselling author, Newbery Award honoree, Prince Award honoree, 2-time National Book Award finalist, Kirkus Award winner, 2-time Walter Dean Myers Award winner, and NAACP Image Award winner, and recipient of multiple Coretta Scott King honors. In addition to this impressive resume, Mr. Reynolds was bestowed the title of 2020-2021 National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. His long list of works, including When I Was the Greatest, The Boy in the Black Suit, the Track series of books, and Long Way Down, have been widely read and loved by all types of readers, while also being heralded as bringing reluctant readers, especially adolescent boys and young men, to a place where they love and cherish reading. Our guest today believes it isn't that those who don't love to read hate reading in and of itself. They simply hate boredom. And because he shares that hate of reading boring books, Mr. Reynolds practices writing every day like a pro athlete practices their game, so he can bring cool stories to the world. We are so excited that even though the format of our conference has changed, Jason Reynolds is here virtually to share his cool stories with us and inspire us with his passion for what he does. Please join me and welcome to TLA 2020, Jason Reynolds.
Hi, everybody. This is weird. You know what? It's interesting. I've done some things similar to this, and I think look, anyone who knows me knows I try to be honest. I try to sort of tell people, tell myself, and tell everyone how I feel and what I like and what I don't like. And I can tell you, I don't like this. But what I also will say is that I'm happy to be here. I'm grateful that we could still somehow figure out how to make this work. And I will do my best to be encouraging. But I hope you all know that, you know, sometimes in the midst or on the road to encouragement, there has to be some truth. And so if the you know, the big platform for this year's TLA is a vision for Texas, you know, I hope everyone's okay with the fact that that vision is going to have to come through growth, and that growth is going to have to come through truth, and that truth is probably going to be a little uncomfortable. So if you are a person who is afraid of discomfort, this is probably not going to be fun for you. I want to be honest about that, but I have an obligation nonetheless to tell you the truth. That being said, I also want to say I am just like everybody else in a strange space in terms of life. I mean, here we all are quarantined and dealing with the things that we're dealing with. And I'm no different than everybody else. I'm struggling. There are certain parts of this that are really hard for me. I'm, you know, clawing to get out of bed in the morning and trying to, you know, pep myself up just to roll off the mattress and to get in the shower and do all the things that we normally would do as humans. But this is also what we do as humans, right? We feel things and we allow ourselves to feel things, and we sort of manage and cope with the things that we feel. So that being said, I am going to wing this thing. And I know people are like, oh, Jason, but you're supposed to be the keynote. Listen, yes, but I'm still a person, and with a whole lot on my plate, including a family, parents that I can't see, and siblings that I can't see, right? All of those things are still the same for me too. So if I didn't have the time to write a speech for you, I hope you understand, right? But don't worry, we will get there. I want to talk about the elephant in the room, and then we'll talk about the bigger elephant in the room. And the elephant that I want to talk about are viruses. Like, I really want to talk just for a brief moment. And I know people are like, this is the one thing we don't want to talk about, but just bear with me for a second. I want to talk about viruses. I want to talk about how viruses work and what they are, because I think if we better understood them, we would better understand a lot of things in our life. And I've been thinking about this quite a bit over the last few days, like preparing for this, like the best that I can, like mentally preparing for this speech. Let's talk about viruses for a second. The interesting thing about viruses that I've learned is that there are millions of them that we inhale, ingest every single second. What a strange thing to sort of wrap our minds around, right? Millions of viruses. I mean, like, I'm talking about, like, viruses are everywhere. They're on your, people are like, oh no, freaking out, right? Everyone's going to get the Lysol, right? It's like, they're on your keyboard, they're in your food, they're on your clothes, they're in your hair, they're in your hair products, they're in your toothpaste, they're in your toothbrush, they're on the lamps and the light switches, the doorknobs. I mean, like, it's the strangest thing to think about, and it gives me a little bit of the willies, right? Like, I understand if you're a little uncomfortable, I am too, but it's an interesting thing to wrap our minds around, right? Like, this idea that viruses, like, there are more viruses than people, right? Like viruses are everywhere, and every single second we're inhaling and ingesting millions of viruses, right? And all viruses are basically like these weird, tiny, these infinitesimal sort of collections of organic materials, right? Like organic matter. And this is science talk. I'm a bit of a nerd. People who don't know, people who think that I'm cool, I'm not as cool as you think I am. I'm actually like a big bookworm. I like to read. As you know, I like to watch all kind of strange documentaries. I go down the YouTube rabbit hole. Anytime Neil deGrasse Tyson's on, I'm like glued to the TV to see if he's going to explain, you know, why I am who I am and how it has to do with the stars, whatever, right? Like, I'm all about all these things. I'm totally into this, right? So here's the thing about viruses. They're made of, like, they're basically these little teeny, like, I don't know, like, imagine like a Rubik's Cube that is smaller than dust, right? And this Rubik's Cube is made up of all these different colors and all the, in this term, it would be like organic matter, right? All these different sort of bits of organic matter all come together to make up a tiny, tiny, tiny microscopic organism that we all call a virus, right? What happens though is that when the virus gets into the body, not all viruses sort of, you know, make us sick, obviously. Not all viruses harm us in terrible ways, of course. Not all viruses take our lives, right? Those things, that's not the way it works. But occasionally, there are viruses that do affect us. How do they affect us, you ask? Well, what happens is when you ingest them or when you inhale them, they go into the body and then they attach themselves to cells in your body, right? And once they find the certain cells to attach themselves to, they start to replicate. And this is when the virus gets a little tricky, gets a little complicated. Because if they were just sort of like individual things that we breathe in and breathe out, that's one thing. But the fact that they can self-replicate is what makes them a little scary. So they come into your body, they attach themselves to cells, and then they self-replicate. And then they go into the cell and they fill the cell, and then the cell tries to fight it off, and then the cell replicates, right? And so forth and so on. Next thing you know, there's virus all over your body, right? That's the way it typically works. But the scariest part about it is the fact that it can propagate itself, that it can literally, without any sort of triggering, it can literally go from one virus to 2 cells of a virus, to 3, to 30, to 60. Now, I'm sure everyone is pretty much freaked out at this point. You know, good morning. I apologize. So let me help you understand on the other side of the coin how vaccines work. Let's talk about vaccines, right? Because I know viruses are like, you know, they pretty much hijack your body. They hijack your cells and then they hijack your body. That's how it works. But we have vaccines. So let me explain how vaccines work. So basically, what happens is vaccines, well, first of all, you have to understand that, like, the body has antibodies, right? The body has like all these other things in it that when the virus comes in, they attack the virus, right? All these other cells in your body that are like your B cells, your T cells. T cells, I'm sure some of you have heard of. That's the cell that sort of fights off HIV, right? Like that's what we're losing when you have HIV. So your B cells and your T cells, and they all sort of jump on the virus and they fight the virus and they're trying to like beat the virus up, right? This is whole thing that's happening with the B cells and your T cells, right? What a vaccine does is a vaccine. Oh, and by the way, when your B cells and T cells are working, you know what you do? You cough, you sneeze, you run a fever, there's inflammation. And what these things are is the body trying to rid itself of the virus, right? So the way that we look at these things usually is, oh no, I know I have a virus because I'm running a fever, right? But the truth is, the reason you're running a fever isn't just because you have the virus, but because your body is working, right? It's basically churning itself, trying to get the virus out of you, right? The reason that you have inflammation, the reason that you are sneezing is because you're trying to get the virus to exit the body. Like your body is working on your behalf to keep you healthy, which I think is genius, right? I think it's one of those weird sort of magical things that our bodies can do to keep us alive and to keep us intact, right? And so the virus attacks, then the body attacks the virus. You're sneezing, you have a fever, all these things are happening, right? As the body tries to rid itself, your cells are kicking in, all sorts of things are happening. Now, a vaccine, all a vaccine basically does is a vaccine says, we're going to basically do the job, or we're going to activate your B and T cells, your what they call like the adaptive immunity, adaptive immune cells, something like that, right? I'm not a doctor, you know. This is sort of the umbrella version of this story, right? The Cliff's Notes. But what happens is your B and T cells, which are your adaptive immunity cells, when they attack the virus, what they're really doing is they're scanning the virus, learning about the virus, remembering every detail about the virus, so that the next time the virus comes in the body, it knows what it is and it's not a problem. What vaccines do is it skips that step and it triggers your B and T cells to figure out how to do that before the virus comes. For instance, the flu shot, right? When I was a kid, I would have to go get a flu shot. I hated the flu shot because every time I would go, the doctor would lift my arm up, he would put the needle in there, and I was never afraid of needles, but the flu shot hurts for like a week after, right? My arm is sore, I can barely move it, I'm upset, right? And then my mother made the mistake of saying, you know, in order for him to give you the flu shot, what he's really doing is he's infecting you with the flu. And in that way, your body knows how to fight it off. Let's be clear about this, by the way. My mother was wrong. That's not what's actually happening. What they really do is they infect you with the parts of the flu that are not the actual illness, right? It's the part of the flu. It's like injecting you with a piece of the motherboard of a of a computer, but not with the whole computer, right? Just a piece of it, so that your body knows how to read the signals that say this is what the flu is going to give off when it comes, and then your body will be able to fight it off. That's the whole point, right? It's a preemptive way to prepare your body for the potential of the flu, right? I'm going to give you a little taste of it. That way, when you see more of it, your body will automatically adapt and know how to fight it before it actually affects you. I think this is genius, right? Now, all of that being said, all of this, the virus, the vaccine, what I want to propose to you all today is that if there are millions of viruses that we breathe in every single second, I wonder why we don't count hate as one. I wonder why we don't count racism as a virus. I wonder why we don't count classism and sexism as viruses. I wonder why we don't see them as the exact same thing as the flu or even COVID-19. Why we don't see them as deadly, right? And as pervasive and as contagious, right? As COVID-19 or as the flu or as anything else that we ingest every single day. And why don't we figure out how to create antibodies, how to create vaccines for ourselves to recognize the thing when it comes in and to be able to fight it off? That's all I've ever been trying to do with my work. And this particular book, Stamped Racism, Antiracism in You, which is this book, by the way. They asked me if I wanted to do slides. I don't do no slides. This is it, right? So this book, this is the book that we're going to talk about. And this is what I'd like to believe is a part of the vaccine for what we're talking about. Part of the vaccine of what we're talking about, right? Here's the thing. When we think about racism, right? When we really think about it, it is, in today's time, the biggest issue with racism is that it is adaptive. It self-propagates, just like the flu, Just like the reason you got to get a new flu shot every year is because there's a new strand of the flu every year, right? That's the reason why the flu mutates and becomes a new flu. Racism does the same thing. Over the years, racism does not look the same as it looked in the 1800s or the 1700s or the 1400s when all of this began, right? Now it looks a lot. Now it looks like certain schools don't have books. Certain schools can't have libraries. Now it looks like certain communities, like it looks like certain households and certain communities can't. It's harder to quarantine because I'm being quarantined in a home with 15 people or 12 people because I live in an environment that doesn't afford me to have much more than that, right? And the reason I don't have much more than that is because of all the social and economical ills that have put me in the situation that I'm in. Or it looks like there are more Black and brown people dying of COVID-19 than everybody else. And the reason why isn't because we're any different or more susceptible, but because of all of the social, economic, and political things in place in our country that unfortunately doesn't provide us with proper healthcare and food. Now, this is a complicated thing to think about, except it's really not. It's really not, right? Racism has had a way over the course of 500 years of changing, shifting, mutating. And what we haven't done is create new vaccines to continue to ward it off every single year. We got to ward it off continuously, which means we have to constantly be changing what the vaccine looks like, right? I mean, even when you think about sort of what racism does, right? It enters the body. In this case, I say it enters the mind specifically. It attaches itself to cells. Right? It attaches itself to parts of who you are, your being, right? Without you even knowing. Without you even knowing. It isn't always this idea that everybody is a bad person. That's not what this is about. I think we have to think a little bigger than that. We have to be a little more nuanced than that. It's a lot more complex than that. If that were the case, this would have been easier to solve. It's not that simple. What happens is that it seeps into the body and it attaches itself to your cells and becomes a part of who you are. So you could be carrying the virus and not even knowing because you could be asymptomatic. What a thing to think about. Scary, which means you being asymptomatic, carrying the virus of racism, that means you could be passing it around without even knowing that you have it. Just like we've been talking about with the coronavirus, just like we talk about with every virus, you could be passing it from person to person with absolutely no clue that you're actually carrying it. I remember years ago, prime example. Years ago, I was in Denver, Colorado with a very good friend of mine, Brendan Kiley. For those of you who don't know who Brendan Kiley is, to me, one of the greatest people I've ever known, one of the greatest men I've ever known for sure. He wrote All American Boys with me, my co-author of All American Boys. And if you haven't read All American Boys, shame on you. No, I'm kidding, it's okay, but you should read it. By the way, All American Boys was banned in Texas. So if we're gonna talk about the vision for Texas, I can't lie to you. I don't wanna lie to you, I love y'all. Texas has been good to me over the years. Truly, I owe a lot to the state of Texas for my career, but I love you enough to tell you the truth. All American Boys was banned several times in the state of Texas. And so there was this one time Brendan and I were on tour for All American Boys, and we're out in Denver, Colorado, I believe. I want to say, I can't remember, maybe somewhere else. Who knows nowadays. And we're talking to maybe 300 or 400 people. And we're talking about implicit bias. Right? For those who don't know, implicit bias is usually a term that we use when talking about the isms, right? Prejudices and racism and sexism and all these other things. It's the thing that says that it's a thing that sits back here, right? So it's not forefront racism. It's a thing that sits all the way back here that shows itself in these really sort of slick and sly ways. It's complicated, and you don't even know you have it until Black man gets in the elevator with you and your heart skips a beat. That's implicit bias. It doesn't mean that you don't like this man. It just means that there's something deep down in there that causes a certain kind of fear, and that fear is very, very much so unwarranted, right? Implicit bias. So we're giving this talk, and a person stands up in the audience and says, I don't have any bias. Now, first of all, as human beings, we all have bias. All of us, we all have prejudices, myself, everybody, right? It's kind of silly. And this person stands up and she says, I don't have bias. I've dealt with my bias years ago. And of course, I'm like, this is gonna be fun, right? Because that's the way I think about it. And so I then posed the question. I said, okay, well, first of all, congratulations for, entering a next level of humanity that none of us will ever get to, right? But congrats. I said, well, let's play a game. Since you no longer have any bias, let's play a game. The name of our book is All American Boys. Brendan is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white man, right? And I am me. And I said, now the name of our book is All American Boys. Which of us is the All American boy? And you could see her face turn gray, right? Because in her mind, her natural reaction was to say, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed man is the All American boy. And the question is, but why not me? I'm also an American, more American than most people, right? Why not me? Why can't I be why wasn't I the first thing to come to your mind? That's what implicit bias is like. Now, think about that on a grander scale. If that's what her bias, her trigger is, her knee-jerk reaction is, how do we know whether or not she's passing that around, right? That very small idea that says that there are some people who are more American than others, who are the symbol of America more than others, who should be looked at as sort of the mascot of America more than others, right? As if I'm any less American than he is. That is how it lives in the body, how it connects to the cells of who we are, how it has been connected to the cells of this country, right? Now, the other question is, well, if that's the case, how do we vaccinate? First of all, the first thing we have to understand is that vaccinations are not cures. First and foremost, those are two words we oftentimes conflate. Vaccination and a cure are not the same things. Vaccinations give the body a way to fight the disease, not to kill it. Cures diseases. We will not be curing racism, right? Look, I'm an optimist. I'd love to think that one day there will be a world where there will be no racism. But the truth of the matter is that human beings categorize. We believe in hierarchy and all this other nonsense that I think is ridiculous, but it is the way it is. And so I have a hard time believing that there will be a cure. Furthermore, I'm not necessarily sure that we should focus on a cure. More so, I think we should focus on ways to constantly be fighting the thing, right? Because if we can do that, then we can live in a world where it doesn't affect us as much. It's not as deadly as coronavirus or as racism is now, right? And so the way that Dr. Kendi and I wanted to do that was in the writing of a stamp from the beginning. And the best way to do that is to figure out new vocabulary around racism to help us grapple with it. You see, culture is built on language, which means if we have new language around culture, then we could build new culture, right? That's how it works. And so what we did is we talked about 3 different ways to think about racism in our lives. There are 3 different categories, and I want to make sure all of you paying attention and listening, I want you to write this down. I think it's very important. And I never say that about my own work because I don't find my work to be so important, but this particular thing I do think is important. Number 1, there are segregationists. What's a segregationist? A segregationist is a person, is what we normally think of as a racist, right? A person who does not want other people around because of the color of their skin. Simple as that, right? They basically are saying, you could never be like me, because you were born to be something less than me. I am superior, you are inferior. It is never going to change simply based on the color of your skin. Then there are assimilationists. Assimilationist is what the majority of us are. Assimilationists say, I'm okay with you as long as you act like me, right? And so we have all these people in the world who are like, hey man, I met a good Black person recently, right? It's that idea, oh, you're not like the rest of them. What people really say, and by people, I mean white people. And I think, look, we have to be okay with having very frank discussions this way, by the way. This is what, for all the librarians paying attention, this is what love sounds like, okay? I wanna make sure you're clear. I know people are like, oh God, people are bristling. Oh no, not the W word, right? I don't wanna do it. Not race, not white, not Black. I don't want to have any of these conversations, but I want a vision for a better Texas, but I don't want to have these conversations. This is what love sounds like. I love you. I love you so much that I'm willing to be honest with you about the things that all of us are grappling with. This is real. This means that look, this is a matter of life or death for our children. We have to think about it that way. So assimilationists are people who say, I like Black people as long as Black people act like me. As long as they put on whatever kind of clothes that I connect with, as long as they speak the way, I love an articulate Black person, because that's a Black person that makes me feel safe, and I feel like they're gonna understand me, I'm gonna understand them, and we're all gonna be fine, right? That's still racist. It's still racist, right? And by the way, Black librarians and brown librarians who are paying attention, we also do this, right? Most of us have grown up with parents who say, look, if you want to get a good job, you better brush that hair, you better don't get no tattoos, you better speak proper English, don't give them no reason to dislike you, make sure you do this and do that, and do this and do that. Look, it's racist. That is racist, because what it says is that there is a standard, and that if I don't meet that standard, then I'm not good enough to exist in the world or to have all the things that I deserve simply for being human. It is a racist concept. And by the way, there are people that we love who live by this concept, people that change the world, like Dr. King. I mean, there are lots of people who were assimilationists. W.E.B. Du Bois was an assimilationist. Dr. King was an assimilationist. We can go on and on and on. It does not mean that their accomplishments don't matter, because usually they had to assimilate out of fear for their lives. But at the end of the day, if the virus is evolving, then the vaccine has to evolve with it. And we have to acknowledge the fact that that might not be the way. If you could put on a suit every day, speak proper English, Dr. King had a master's degree by the time he was like 17 years old, and he was still shot down at the Lorraine Motel. It did not work. So then we have to try a new vaccine. And so the last concept is anti-racist. So you have segregationists. That means I hate you because you are not like me. You have assimilationists. That means I like you because you just like me. And then you have assimilationist. And then you have an anti-racist. And anti-racists say, I love you just because you are like you. I love you for being who you are. That's it. So if you speak like the people in your neighborhood, we're in Texas, so if you are a Mexican American and you speak Spanglish, I love you for being like you. That's all right with me, right? We'll figure it out, but you don't have to change, right? America is the only multicultural country that's not actually multicultural. It's multicultural in its face because there are a lot of cultures who live here, but they all have to assimilate into a single culture, which means it's not actually a place that thrives on multiculturalism, if we're being honest, right? We accept the cultures, but then we expect the cultures to bend into a homogenous culture, which is the American culture, which, if we were being honest, is the white American culture, which, if they were being honest, is related to the history of Europe, which is why we even say the Western world in the first place. Western to who? To who? Because if I'm think about that, right? That Europe is the center of the whole world, and that Western is here and Eastern is Asia. To who? It depends on where you're standing and where you think the center is. And what this book does, what this book is meant to do, is to help us form vaccines to fight against these things. Now, I'll give you a quick premise about how it's broken down. It's broken down into sections. And what we do is we study 5 different people. We study sort of Cotton Mather. Well, really what I do in my approach is I study the very first racist who ever exists, a man named Gomes Yanes de Zurara, who's a Portuguese man. And he was the man who basically was the first person to write narrative around his king capturing Africans. And what he did was he said, at the time, all of Europe was capturing everybody, by the way. But what he did was he said, what makes us better than the rest of you slave captives is that we are capturing Africans because we want to save them through Jesus. He was the first person to document a benevolent enslavement, right? And therefore, and he documented it, and because of that documentation, he technically is on record as the world's first racist, right? Now, it starts from him, and it leads all the way up, and it gets into Aristotle, right? Everybody loves Aristotle as a philosopher, but he was a horrible man. He had brilliant ideas in certain ways, but he had really rudimentary ideas in other ways. He believed that the Greeks were superior than anyone who was non-Greek. He believed in human hierarchy, and all the Puritans looked at Aristotle as basically the smartest man in the world. Aristotle believed that the reason that Africans, quote unquote, were savages is because it was hot in Africa. He believed the weather of the place is what made people Black. And that is what sort of debased them and justified their enslavement. So when the Puritans come to Boston and they start the Puritan church, the first thing they do is they use Aristotle's human hierarchy, and they say that anybody who was not Puritan is inferior than the Puritans. And then those same people, the exact same group of people who started the Puritan church, start Harvard University, and the first thing they write into the bylaws is that all things can be argued except for Greek literature, which means that Aristotle and his human hierarchy could not be argued in higher education. So the church and the school are the first places in this country where racism existed. And from there, they sort of propagated out like the viruses that they are, right? Imagine that. Now, having known that, we all have an obligation to make sure that we undo some of this in our school libraries and our public libraries. Are we really thinking about an anti-racist world? Are we really making sure that our bookshelves are anti-racist, that our staffs are anti-racist, right? That our imagery on the walls are anti-racist? This is a very important thing, and you think it's not. You think it's no big deal. You think that just because your community may be homogenous, that it's okay for your walls and your bookshelves to be homogenous, but that's the way viruses work. That's the way it goes. It's no big deal until it's attached to this, until the young people have it attached to their cells that they are the only people on earth, that they are superior just because they look the way they look, because everything in their library reinforces the idea, right? Now, from this, the world's first races, we then go through tons of other people. I mean, we talk about Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin and how literature has played a part in this thing from the beginning. We talk about Frederick Douglass. We talk about William Lloyd Garrison and the abolitionist movement and everything that he believed in, and how literature sort of helped to break the bonds of slavery and the racist ideas at the time. And he was a good man. He was complicated, but you have to read the book for that. We talk about Thomas Jefferson, the most contradictory figure in American history. Complicated man. I mean, this man grew up on one of the biggest plantations in the world, but looked at his slaves like his friends when he was a child. Complicated. Yeah, I'll let y'all read the book to find out about all that. We get into W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the greatest Black leaders to ever live, but he was a complicated man who was also a terrible assimilationist. And all these people, by the way, most of them, that you watch their lives sort of go from assimilationist and then they end later on in life at anti-racist once they realize that assimilationism doesn't work. It's actually a beautiful thing. And what that sort of drives home is that all of us have an opportunity to evolve. This vision for all Texans, I mean, to have a vision is a beautiful thing because you can see down the line, but the journey to fruition of that vision may look like a lot of things. So it's okay for us to evolve. And every day for me in my life, there are moments where I'm an assimilationist and moments where I'm an anti-racist every day. And every day I have to fight back the assimilationist part of myself to be more anti-racist than anything else, right? But it's a process. There is no end game. There is no cure. Right? It's a constant fighting, a constant sort of revaccination every single day to remind myself what it means to live an anti-racist life. From W.E.B. Du Bois, we also get to who I think and who Ibram and I both think are the most important person in anti-racist history, which is Angela Davis. And we really delve into her life. I think she should be studied more often. She's the only person that has lived at the intersection of all the things, right? From racism, right? She was anti-racist, she was anti-sexist, she was anti-classist, she was an anti-homophobic, right? She was all about prison reform. She was all about welfare reform. She literally has always been on the right side of history forever and ever and ever. Despite being an incredible person accused of a terrible crime and got herself off for murder that she did not commit when she was like 20 years old and represented herself is pretty incredible in and of itself. I mean, we really should be looking at her as the epitome of what it means to be an American citizen, but also just an incredible human being. And so look, I won't dwell on this. I hope this is enough to sort of let you all at least light your fires. Be not afraid of this book. People were really afraid of All American Boys when it came out. And I want to be honest, some people, not all people, because like I said, I got a lot of love in Texas, lots of love. You know what I mean? I guess I owe a lot of my career to Texas librarians specifically. And I'll never take that from you. But I know your textbooks are funky, right? I know that I've been given the blues in your state. As much love as I get, is it just as much hate as I get in your state? This is not a book to be afraid of. right? This is a book to lean into, to really get into, to fight through, to fight yourself on, right? It's okay. Like, let's wrestle with this so that our children, no matter where they grow up, understand that human beings are human beings, period. I don't care what you got going on, where you from, what you look like, what language you speak, what God you pray to, what your sexual orientation is. None of it matters, right? An anti-racist world is a world that says that you belong simply because you are, period, period. Like, that's it. Not because you got long hair, short hair, dark skin, like whatever. If you are a human being, then you deserve what all human beings deserve. Simple as that. In this book, and I want to make sure one other thing is clear. It gets into how this isn't just about human beings and one-to-one interaction. Racism is much bigger than that. This is about policies, racist policies in place that have caused all these things to happen from the very beginning of our great country, from the beginning of it. Policies put in place that have trickled down over time and have become the country that we live in today, for better or worse. And I think it's important that we start to grapple with that as well, especially as we raise young people who will be active citizens, active voters, active voices in our communities, that they understand the ramifications and repercussions of policy, especially when those policies have historically been racist. I want to read the last little bit, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. All right. So I'm not going to spoil the book for you, but I'm going to read a bit of the acknowledgement section because it really kind of nails down what I really am trying to say. There's no one I'd like to thank more than all the young people, those who have read this book and are now reading it, and those who may never break the spine. All of you deserve thanks. All of you deserve acknowledgement. All of you deserve to know that you are, in fact, the antidote to anti-Blackness, xenophobia, homophobia, classism, sexism, and the other cancers, which really should be viruses, that you have not caused, but surely have the potential to cure. You know how I know this? Because I'm one of the fortunate people who get to spend time with you. I've been in your schools, I've walked the hallways with you. I've sat at your lunch tables and cracked jokes with you. I've popped into your libraries and community centers, from the suburbs to public housing complexes. I've been to the alternative schools and the detention centers, from the inner city to Iowa. And what I've learned is that you're far more open and empathetic than the generations before you. So much so that your sensitivity is used as an insult, a slight against you. Your desire for a fair world is seen as a weakness. What I've learned is that your anger is global because the world now sits in the palm of your hand. You have the ability to teleport, to scroll upon a war zone or a murder, to witness protest and revolution from cultures not your own, but who share your frustration, your refusal, your fear. But I have to warn you, scrolling will never be enough. Reposting will never be enough. Hashtagging will never be enough, because hatred has a way of convincing us that half love is whole. What I mean by that is we, all of us, have to fight against performance and lean into participation. We have to be participants, active. We have to be more than audience members, sitting comfortably in the stands of morality, shouting wrong. That's too easy. Instead, we must be players on the field, on the court, in our classrooms and communities, trying to do right. Because it takes a whole hand, both hands, to grab hold of hatred, not just the texting thumb and the scrolling index finger. But I have to warn you again, we can't attack a thing we don't know. That's dangerous and foolish. It would be like trying to chop down a tree from the top of it. If we understand how the tree works, how the trunk and roots are where the power lies, and how gravity is on our side, we can attack it, each of us with small axes, and change the face of the forest. So let's learn all there is to know about the tree of racism, the root, the fruit, the sap and trunk, the nests built over time, the changing leaves. That way, your generation can finally actively chop it down. Thank you, young people. I wish I could name you all, but I'd much rather you name yourselves. Make this your new textbook. I know y'all are librarians, but go to your school librarians, this is your new textbook. And if you're a public librarian, collaborate with your schools. This is the new textbook. This is what we should be teaching. I am done. Questions?
Thank you so much, Mr. Reynolds. We are so great that you did, so excited to hear you speak. And I can say from experience, I absolutely started my white fragility walk last year when the book was brought to me, and so much of my eyes have been open. And hearing you speak, reading your book stamped, well, I'm an audiobook listener, so listening to your book stamped has been incredible. And I have really made lots of connections to our middle grade students, and how are we going to bring this in to our schools and help our teachers and our faculty and staff make this crossover. So for everybody in the Q&A side, if you guys will go ahead and submit your Q&A questions, that we'll be going through those and getting those answered in the remaining time. We're going to cut off a few minutes before noon to once again give thanks to Mr. Reynolds. But I'm going to start us off with our first question. How do you view the role of libraries in the liberation and dismantling of racist systems within our educational systems?
You know, that's such a good question. You know, I have a soft spot for not just libraries, but for librarians for very specific reasons. I've learned over the years that in my travels and in, you know, all the schools and the visits and the you know, just all the things. What I've learned is that librarians are almost always the rebels of the school. They're always the ones who understand that everything belongs on the shelf, even if they personally disagree with it, right? Even if it's something that doesn't jive with your own morals and ethics, you recognize, or politics for that matter, you recognize that it belongs on the shelf. Now, if we were to take the same idea that librarians already had just in the ethics of librarianship and apply it to the ethics of humanity, then we'll be in a better space. That everything, despite whether you agree, everyone, despite whether you agree with them or not, every child, despite whether you agree with them or not, belongs in this space. They belong in your space. They deserve a voice, they deserve a platform. That is a very simple adjustment that that's a very small thing that I know most of you are already doing. I'd even argue that libraries, or specifically librarians, as under the role of librarian, are anti-racist, are working as anti-racist. I just think we need to take what you do as librarians and make sure it's a part of your actual life, like that it's embedded into who you are outside of your jobs, right? But in the library itself, I think a lot of you are doing it, have been doing it. I think that's why the libraries, I think, are such brilliant places and such important pillars of our communities. What I will say though is that if you live in a homogenous place, if you live somewhere that is less diverse, that you got to kind of push a little bit, make it a little uncomfortable. I think it's okay. I think it's okay to if you're going to pick a book of the month, make it something that you wouldn't normally make it. Make it something that you may feel doesn't appeal to your community, and then hold book clubs around those books. Hold a book club around Stamped. And yes, it may cause some friction, it may cause some discomfort, but ultimately what I hope it causes is some conversation. And within that conversation just might come some understanding. Look, there's no easy solution, there's no 1+1, but the goal is to always be thinking as better human beings. And in order to think as better human beings, we got to make sure that we're pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zones. It's that simple, you know. That simple. Challenge your biases, be honest about your prejudices, right? Be honest about who you bristle about when they walk through that door. Be honest about your bookshelves and what you think people want to read. Be honest about all those things first with yourself, and then try to sort of inch by inch, make changes.
Yeah, I definitely know that there is a little bit of uncomfortability when we start talking and having to acknowledge that I am racist, and not necessarily because I'm a hateful, evil, horrible person, but more of just because of the symptomatic ways that I've been raised and what has been around me. So this was given as a question, doesn't have a name, so it's by anonymous, but it says, is there a checklist to becoming anti-racist or something to work towards?
You know what? So first I want to say to your comment you just made, because you're right. Like, I think the biggest mistake ever is that we've categorized the idea of racism as like racism equals evil person, right? And it's like we have to sort of figure out how to rework the definitions of even that, right? Like, for instance, myself, I'm raised a man in America. I've been a man my whole life. I'll be a man my whole life, which means I have to be honest about my own misogyny. I have to be honest about it. not because I want to be a misogynist, but because I grew up in a space that protected misogyny, encouraged misogyny, and drilled it into the fibers of who I am, that this is the way I'm supposed to be. Now, in order for me to undo it after 36 some odd years, I have to be honest about the fact that it's there, right? That's all this is, right? It's just about honesty. It's like therapy, self-therapy, right? That's it. Now, in terms of a checklist, there's no checklist. There's no checklist, you know. And honestly, racism, Brendan Kiley used to always say there's also no finish line, right? Brendan Kiley always talks about how, you know, undoing racism is something that he'll be undoing for the rest of his life. Because like I talked to you about the virus, there's somebody else on my side panel that said, you know, is fear the virus? Fear is a part of the virus, right? Fear is a part of the virus. Racism is part of the virus. All the isms are a part of the virus. Prejudice in general is a part. Prejudice that has metastasized into something that is unreasonable is a part of is the virus, right? Now, why do I say metastasizing something unreasonable? Because there are parts of prejudice that we use to protect ourselves, right? Like prejudice is also a part of our sympathetic nervous system. It's the thing that says, this is a situation that I've been in before, and I have some scarring there. And before, this kind of person did this thing to me. Is that going to happen again? That's a very natural reaction. And all I'm saying is, it is incumbent upon us to constantly be working against that and to say that each individual instance is just that, an individual instance. I've been done wrong by a lot of people. It doesn't mean that everybody who looks like the people that I've been done wrong by are all the same. Right? If a white teacher, when I was a kid, said something completely disrespectful to me, it doesn't mean that I have to then be afraid or dislike or be mistrusting of all white people. It just doesn't. Right? It just doesn't. Right? Doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that if I am that is unwarranted. No, like that's a real thing. I'm a human being who has to struggle with all of my own sort of psychosis and things going on in my head. But it means that it's important to me to push back against it and to say that I also know wonderful people who happen to be white who haven't done those things. I also know brown people who have done terrible things to me, but I love us, right? They're like, that's all it's about, right? It's about making sure that we're not blanketing any one group of people. And here's a prime example. And this is the way you look at it from a macro level, right? Because right now we're talking about one-to-one. And what I'm talking about is like structural policy, macro level stuff, right? So if let's pick prison, prime example. There are, as I'm sure most of you know, there are more Black people in prison than anybody else, right? We make up the majority, the mass majority of the prison population, even though we only make up about 12% of the country, which is interesting. And so the question is that because Black people commit more crimes, right? And the answer to that question is no, right? And how do we know that? How do we know that? Well, we know that because when we do research, we find out it's not that Black people commit more crimes, it's that police officers patrol Black communities at a higher rate, right? It's that certain Black communities, because of all kinds of historic things like redlining, like welfare reform, like the job market and the housing market, like the GI Bill, where Black people, most of us could not get the bill and therefore could not buy property. All these sorts of things have also created iniquities in our society that sometimes put us in impoverished spaces. And in those impoverished spaces, we make decisions that break laws. But it does not mean that only Black poor people are doing this, because white poor people do the exact same things. It's just that police officers don't patrol Appalachia in the way that they patrol in Harlem. That's what we're saying. And so we have to start addressing if Tom Brady, y'all in Texas, so if the Cowboys win the Super Bowl every single year, right? There can only be two reasons that could be the case. Either because the Cowboys are literally superior than every other team every single year, or somebody's cheating. That is the way this works. We know that no one is superior, right? We know that genetically we are exactly the same as humans. No one is more genetically superior. No one's skin is genetically superior. No, which means the only other option is someone is cheating. It's not your fault that someone is cheating. These are policies put in place long before any of us were born, but they continue to metastasize and change and transform, right? Which then propagates the virus continuously. And the vaccination is having these kinds of conversations to be able to call it out so that our bodies can call it out when it witnesses them. It can recognize it when we see it.
That's awesome. It reminds me of listening to the podcast Serial Part 3, where they explored the pipeline that people of color have in the judicial system, and it was very powerful. We're going to switch gears just a little bit, and we've got another question from Melissa S. Other than your own books, because your books are wonderful, what are your top 5A YA books that you think should be in every middle school / high school library?
Oof. That's tough. That's tough. Let's see. I would go with Sharon Creech, Love That Dog, which is, it's funny, people love Long Way Down and all that kind of stuff, but people don't understand the first time I'd ever seen a novel in verse was when I was 22 years old, and it was Sharon Creech, Love That Dog. It's a masterpiece. It doesn't get nearly enough credit. So check out that. I would say Walter Dean Myers' Monster, I think, is a masterpiece. I don't think there's many YA books better than that. I would say, so many. Gosh, it's hard to not go with like The Crossover. I think that's it's a brilliant, Kwame's my god, but it's also like, it's a brilliant book. Oh gosh, you know what? There's a book called Kira Kira by Cynthia Kawahata. Now, this book I think is like, it won the Newbery some years back. Brilliant book about being Asian. I believe I don't want to get it wrong. I believe they're Chinese in the book, growing up in Georgia in the 60s. And so it's like, well, black people over there, white people over there, but what about us? And it's just brilliant story. Check that one out. And what else? I get one more. I'm trying to pick somebody new. I would pick myself, but it seems like it's in poor taste, so I won't pick me. It just feels a little wrong. Maybe, I don't know, guys. I don't know, and I don't want to. My friends are gonna find out. They're gonna be like, "Why didn't you say my book?" I'll just go with my own book. I would say put something like Ghost in there. It's not my favorite, but everybody else, Ghost is probably something. I know it works. I know young people like it. It's not the one that I would pick out of that series, but sounds like Ghost.
Well, I will throw my vote for you. Like I said, I have been loving Stamped. It has been awesome and very eye-opening.
Oh yeah, Stamped. There you go. Boom. Required. Stamped.
Yes. Yes. I love it. So here is another anonymous question, and I think this is going to be sort of our last question. How do you recommend people confront past deeds of the racist policies and behaviors that have been put out there?
How do I say it one more time?
How do you recommend people confront past deeds of racist policies and behaviors?
How do I recommend people confront past deeds? So if a person has been mistreated, how do I recommend that they go and address the mistreatment? Oof. I think that's the question. That's tough. Because I have to be responsible here, right? And so it's complicated, and I get this question often, but it's complicated because the first thing I would say is safety is real, right? Like I want people to be safe. I don't think, and not everybody is ready to have these conversations. Not everybody is ready to talk about some of the ugly bits of themselves as freely as maybe I can, or as maybe some of you can. And so I'm always a little cautious, and I think sometimes we have to figure out if this conversation is going to be fruitful, then go for it. But if you know deep down that this person is going to be averse and it's not going to be fruitful and it's not affecting your life, I don't know if it's a necessary conversation to have. And that, like, I'm trying to I think sometimes we have to pick and choose where the battles are, pick and choose how to address certain things and when to address certain things, because I think sometimes things can get kind of dangerous or a bit more volatile than we expect. I always, my mother and I, whenever there are things that we want to talk about or past deeds that she's done or anything like that, it usually is going to happen over food, or it's going to happen over us reading something about the issue and then having some discourse around it. Because the books oftentimes create buffers. That way, it doesn't have to be me attacking this person's quote unquote attacking or calling out this person. It could be more about us talking about the topic at hand and then sharing ideas about it. And then from there, we could all, you can kind of come through the back door. Because no one likes to feel guilty or be indicted, right? That's why these conversations are so complicated, because the moment you say race or white or black, people start to reel out of it. People start to pull back from a conversation because they're afraid they're going to be judged. That's not what this is about. Your guilt doesn't change anything, right? Your shame doesn't do anything for the rest of us. At the end of the day, but it's on me to make sure that I'm entering into the conversation with compassion. The truth is, as much as I love truth without compassion is cruelty, and that's not what I'm about. And so even with the people who have transgressed us, they still require, in certain circumstances, not all, but in certain circumstances, they require a bit of compassion. Now, if they're not down for the conversation, it's not your place to force it upon them. It's your place to go and build allyships and alliances that can make sure they support with your ideas in an anti-racist world and protect the people around you and around that person who may be infected by such a terrible virus. They'll come along in the long run, because no one likes to be on the outside, so it's complicated.
Yes, it's definitely a complicated topic and subject. And it's one of those ones that I feel that white people need to shoulder that burden on. And so in my work in white fragility is taking some of that onto my own shoulders and giving people of color the ability and the freedom to feel like they can speak to me and tell me where I need improvement.
No, it's great. Look, at the end of the day, I tell people when I'm with Brendan, I tell them all the time, look, it's so wonderful to not have to be an angry black man because I got an angry white man next to me. And it's a wonderful thing. I don't got to fight these fights no more. My man's just going to jump up and going to handle it, right? And but for the white folks out there who are like, this is what I want to be and what I want to try to do for my people of color around me or whatever it is. Listen, we need you. Like, that's real. We need you. It can't change without you, but you don't get no cookie for being a good person. You do not get praised for being a good person, right? Like if you're doing it because you want a pat on the back, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. Just keep that in mind, all right?
I totally agree with that statement. And I can tell you, if I could keep you here for another hour, just talking and answering more questions, I absolutely would. I want to thank you so much for your time with us at TLA at this virtual conference and making this work and doing it live. It is incredible. I'm honored. Thank you for writing that book. Thank you for partnering up to bring that book down to a level so that we could bring it into our educational system and really start impacting our kids in the way that they're going. If at any point in time you make it back down to Texas, let me tell you, Topo Chicos and tacos on me. I'd love to talk more with you. I'm sure every librarian here in Texas would give them that honor. So anytime you step foot within these borders, we will do our best to advocate for you, for your work. But also, like I said, tacos and Topo Chico on me anytime that you step into this state. Thank you again so much. Please shout out one more time your book. Tell us where we can get it and how you want us using it and advocating for it.
Yeah. Stamped Racism, Antiracism, and You by myself with my good buddy, Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Get it wherever you buy books. Shout out to Blue Willow. Shout out to Blue Willow down in Texas. Shout out to book people down in Texas. All my booksellers down there got love for you. They're also in your libraries, hopefully. So get them in your libraries. So that everyone has access to them. I appreciate y'all. I love y'all so much, and be safe. And I hope to see y'all soon.